So we're talking about protecting your brand today, and I'd like to start with you, Darren. Obviously, let's look at it from a legality point of view. Of course, there's options out there to protect your intellectual property, but just refresh our memories on what the options are and how brands go about protecting the IP.
Thanks, Jacqui. To distill it down, there are basically 4 types of what we call intellectual property, which protects one's brands. And the most typical forms for protecting a brand are copyright, which would protect a logo, for example, and certain designs, and a trademark. And a trademark is anything that distinguishes one product from another. And
like a Nike swoosh?
Exactly,
okay.
Like a Nike swoosh. If you take, for example, a Coke can, it's obviously the word mark CocaCola. The colour red is very distinctive of Coke's brand, and the shape of that bottle.
Right.
And if you get onto a very kind of sexy side of it, there's smells and
the recipe of Coke can be protected, right?
Not as a trademark, not as a patent, but there's copyright in the recipe, and there's also valuable trade secrets, obviously, that Coke allegedly have in the Coke recipe.
Which have apparently just been revealed on Twitter.
Oh, is that right?
Tell us.
Last week there was a Twitter post of apparently a photograph of the original recipe for Coca-Cola, and there's a bit of a storm going on.
But how do you know that what's on the internet is real? You know, that brings us to another issue, is social media. I mean, any consumer can, you know, make up their own Facebook page, use a Nike logo, and how the consumer is going to know if it's real? Do you find that's a threat, social media?
No, I think for us, social media is usually a tool to explain to consumers the benefits of the brand. Nike's commitment to design in terms of performance and the planet has been at the forefront of our innovation drive. And I think for us is using the social media to get the consumers really to understand the benefits of a Nike versus a counterfeit.
Do you not too worried if someone posts a Facebook page pretending to be Nike, using your logo and making all sorts of statements? Would that not be a concern?
Yeah, for us is that clearly our platforms, I'll give you an example. On South Africa, we use Mixit as an example. 450,000 consumers interact with Nike on Mixit. So anybody trying to do a smaller platform really doesn't bother us that much in terms of really making sure that the consumers know the mediums that Nike is really communicating with them.
Yeah, interesting. But now let's go back, Giles, to protecting your intellectual property. Do you think brand owners necessarily know exactly what the ins and outs are? Do they understand?
I think that there are a lot of examples where brand owners, senior people within brand owning companies are confused about the options that Darren was referring to and what is necessary from a legal standpoint to do to protect your brand. You know, the trademarking versus is copyright enough? You know, I think a lot of people just imagine that because they've put it into a market, they automatically are properly protected, and that's often not the case.
Do you agree, Darren?
I do agree. I think what is changing, though, is high-profile cases, for example, ANC versus Cope, for example, the ambush marketing around the World Cup last year. Yeah. And what that has taken intellectual property to dinner party conversations, and I think that's good for it's good for telling people and educating people about what is required, because that drives interest. And then obviously drives correct best practices. But we do find often, actually, when companies are being bought and sold, that intellectual property is one of the most neglected assets of the business.
So here's a question. We all remember those T-shirts that they made use of the logo, the actual logo, but then the writing would be different. I mean, there was a Nike one and a Coca-Cola one and whatever, any brand you can think of. Yes, campaign, absolutely. Yeah. So, Darren, to what point is that infringement?
Infringing is any mark that sounds the same, looks the same, or means the same as the registered trademark. That's technically a definition of infringement.
So if there was a swoosh, that's infringing?
Correct.
But they're not saying just do it, they're saying something else. So it's almost like a tongue-in-cheek kind of version. It's a tongue-in-cheek thing. Well, I mean, there are two things. Whether it technically infringes, and then the other aspect is whether you take action against them, because it can backfire. Especially if those campaigns, and Giles will know more, have caught the public's attention. And one has to be careful when enforcing one's brand, actually especially on social media, because it can backfire on you. But the thing is not to ignore it, because if that happens, one person allowed, then the next person's allowed, and before long it's snowball.
There was a big backfire, of course, with the Carling Black Label Laugh Out Loud T-shirt, and they went hell for leather to try and attack the Laugh Out Loud guys for that, and they weren't successful, and I don't think it worked out particularly well for SAB. But I think the other point to make is that when they're doing that, they're not trying to convince consumers that this is a Nike shirt,
it's not a copy.
or that's a. They're not copying. They're not passing off. They're making use of the trademark for other purposes. So it becomes a very
it's a different story
area
altogether. But Anwar, doesn't it irritate you when you see things like that? What do you guys think? As Nike South Africa, when you see things like that at flea markets.
Well, yeah, for us, the major area that we want to protect is our area in terms of the performance piece for Nike. Really, a consumer that buys a product expecting a certain level of performance, and then also the positioning that Nike is caring for the planet in terms of our considered design.
Yeah, but we're not talking now counterfeit. We're just talking about trademark infringement, because we are going to talk about counterfeit goods in part 2. So we're saying, as Giles was saying, they're using the logo. It's not a copy of Nike, but it's almost making fun of the brand in a way.
Yeah, no, we work very closely with our legal firm in terms of managing the trademark infringement piece for us, because it is really important.
Right.
In terms of specifically if there's a passing off piece, but then also in terms of huge financial revenue being made with people thinking that Nike is associated with this product. Yeah.
Right. But do you fight every case, Anwar, or do you almost choose your own battles?
Well, I think everybody wants to imitate the best in the business, so there's everybody trying to cash in on that, and obviously can't tackle every single case.
You can't tackle everyone. Darren?
That's absolutely true. The one thing, when we talk about infringement, is confusion and likelihood of confusion.
Yeah.
What we're talking about here is actually a gradual tarnishing of one's brand through misuse, and that is now recognized for the last, say, 15 years as a separate form of trademark infringement. That's detrimental to its distinctive character or blemishes the brand. And that's where we tend to take
What about
action.
penalties? Are penalties high enough to actually deter people from infringing?
Penalties can be high. It's difficult to get them. Counterfeiting is one aspect, but in terms of trademark infringement, what we find is that most companies look to stop and get them off the market as soon as possible. That's the primary objective, and very seldom does one get big damages awards, unlike patent disputes.